stand up unitedly against all hate crimes? This is the topic of today's Alapcharita, and we have got panel members. From my right is Umesh Desai, to my right is Rob Ferguson, to my left is Mr. Emdadul Haq Chaudhary, President, London Bangla Press Club. Thank you, Emdad Bhai, for joining us. And to my extreme left is Dr. Bari. So before we went for the break, we were actually discussing, Bari Bhai, you were saying something. My question to Zain was, what is it that we as a community need to do in terms of making ourselves more inclusive? And in that, from that perspective, how do we actually make some sort of difference in relation to making ourselves more part of the mainstream community? Because we often hear comments or concerns that a Muslim community are not, they're not part of the mainstream community. We are kind of not focusing much on community cohesion and stuff like that. So what sort of, is there anything different that we need to do or focus on in terms of making ourselves more inclusive of the mainstream
Well, I think
community?
inclusivity, community cohesion, integration, they are two-way process. And especially people who come from developing countries, probably war-based, and they will have initial difficulties in the first decade or second decade or first generation. And the settled immigrant community from the same group probably can help them. On the other hand, the wider society should embrace them. It's not only tolerate. Tolerance is just the minimum aspect of human relationship.
It's the respect, isn't
it's
it,
the
for each
respect
other?
and celebration of humanity. At the end of the day, we all human beings are brothers and sisters in humanity, and we may come from different backgrounds, and also we may have different opinions, but the same blood flow through our veins, and hopes and aspirations. So there is a huge responsibility for community leaders and communities that try to come and settle. And from Muslim perspective, it's incumbent for Muslims to interact with the others, or try to engage with the others, try to mainstream their activities. On the other hand, if there is any prejudice or discrimination or racism or bigotry, that needs to be addressed by the politicians, and that needs to
by
be
the leadership.
political leadership, central leadership, local leadership, and leadership at all levels. Also, media always comes into this discussion. Certain sections of the media they thrive on sensational news, and sometimes deliberately ignoring the minority communities, or they're trying to portray them in a very negative manner. The problem is drip feed or little dose of negative headline or media or caricature, everything that piles up, and the racists and thugs, they take cue from that, and when politicians do not address them, then that could be differentiation. I had discussed on the stigmatization of people who gradually are ethnically cleansed or subjected to genocide. And what happened in Hitler's Germany in 1930s, they stigmatized a certain group of people in the name of Aryan supremacy. They were the superior, these are the other people. So us and them, that is the start. And if the society, political leaders, community leaders, and religious leaders do not take care of that, then that can flourish.
Emad Bhai, in terms of, as Bari Bhai was referring, the role of media, because you were saying just before we were starting that we need to stand up against yellow journalism or media who would intentionally portray one specific community into a very negative light. So what was your initial reaction when you saw this news?
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me in this very important discussion. Well, it was devastating for everybody. Any human being would be terrified by the incident. And you have asked me about the role of the media. I understand that Facebook have been told to remove the live streaming. I just wonder how come an atrocity like this was
allowed to be going on. Yes.
I know Facebook is a very big company, and it was going on for 20 minutes, and I don't know how their system works and how it was not detected, why it was not detected at the early stage. I think overall, obviously, there will be stigmatization, as Baribhai was referring to. There will be ignorance in the society. But the people who claim to be enlightened, they should come forward from every sections to minimize that gap. In this country, we appreciate the welcoming attitude of general public. If the people of this country did not invite or did not welcome the minorities or the immigrants, then we wouldn't have been here today. But I think there is a problem in the establishment. There are structural barriers there. It is always, there is a blame always put forward towards the ethnic community who has come to make this country of their own, that they are not doing enough to be integrated. But I think, as Baribhai was referring to, that it's a two-way process, and I think being the host community, being the host country, UK establishment authorities should be much more welcoming and supportive of immigrant communities, because at the end of the day, immigrant community has a lot of contribution to free this country. If we talk about First World War, if we talk about Second World War, there are contributions across the world.
And now the economic contribution that our guardian industry
that goes without saying. In regards to the media, I've just got a report in front of me. I have just printed out. Guardian reports that terror attack by, stigmatizing one section of the community is very dangerous game to play. And I think the politicians are not taking enough stand against those things. Media bias is established in this country. It's not only about the migrant community or the minority community. It's even against a person or a group of people who are favoring, who are liberal, who are left, who are accommodating. They take a stand. The media, a certain section of the media takes a stand. I've got a report here that says that terror attacks by Muslims receives 357% more press attention. That's a study in the USA. The University of Alabama has shows that Muslims receive an average of 105 headlines against 15 only if it is committed by others. I just want to draw. I just want to draw a parallel. I know we all know that how Jeremy Corbyn became. Defeating all the odds, he became the leader of the Labour Party, and that is a report by LSE, London School of Economics, and we cannot just throw away this report. That's the front page of the report. If you look at the front pages of all the national media in this country, you will see how demonizing those reports, because Jeremy Corbyn became the leader, and they are saying that the British media, section of the British media, has become a tag dog from being a watchdog. And we see that because Jeremy Corbyn is always supportive of minority communities, he is a liberal politician, he was always on the right side of the history.
Yeah, leadership is very important, but I'll come to you, Umesh. In terms of, Rob, how do you see the role of media in terms of this increased concerns about racism in UK?
There was a very good letter to the Guardian newspaper, written, signed by Muslim leaders, figures from all over the world, that started off by saying, this massacre did not begin with the bullets that were fired from the gun. And in that letter, one of the culpable targets they named, quite rightly in my view, was the media. Because we've had front page after front page casting Muslims as an enemy within, as child abusers, as completely alien and a threat. And this is from mass circulation media. There's often so much directed at social media, and so forth. And there is an issue there. But it lets the mainstream off the hook. And this is what gives these ideas, these views, these prejudices, this hate, respectability, legitimacy. And then you get people like Tommy Robinson, the far right, and then individuals like those.
Yeah, the hero Imam was part of that.
But they draw on the legitimacy given, and then they say, look, we agree, they're the enemy, but you liberals, you elite, you're not doing enough about them. We know how to solve this problem with a gun, or with a bomb, or with a knife, or with a fist. And I think it's very important to understand the dynamic, and the media is culpable here. They cannot simply stand back and say, and I'm sure there's sincerity behind what they're saying, this is shocking, dreadful, culpable, and so on. You know, I have a bit of a question. Who let the dogs out? You know, who started this hair running when you put not just an odd front page, but week after week, day after day? This has an impact, and it has happened before. It happened in the 60s and 70s against the black and Asian population. It happened before the Second World War with my community, the Jewish community.
The enemy
it
within.
happened with the Irish. This needs to be contested, and my view is we have to build a movement against it.
How do you see the leadership of the Prime Minister of New Zealand?
Well, I think she has been remarkable, both in terms of her words, but also in terms of her actions. You know, the financial assistance, which of course money does not compensate at all for what's happened, but the very fact that she was actually offering
Her
practical
actions,
solidarity.
Gun law is going to be reformed.
She's going to
looked at.
reform,
Yeah.
and she straight away said this is a terrorist act. It's not some lone wolf or whatever. She came down very hard.
And a very unique vow that she has taken, that she's not going to name.
And she's not going to name the
name
terrorists,
the
but
terrorist,
let's name the people who were massacred, who were
Absolutely,
killed.
yeah.
But look, the language of politicians and the media, particularly this time, is of course extremely important. Let's get some facts out there. Firstly, this country's most senior anti-terrorist officer, Neil Basu, just a few weeks ago warned of his fears about the rise of far right-wing extremism because of uncertainties around Brexit. More than 1/3 of referrals to prevent are actually of young white individuals, not just young, but who are in the influence of far right-wing ideology. Hate crime has gone up. I mean, the report that I've done about policing London, which is about crime and security in London, hate crime has gone up since 2014. Anti-Semitic hate crimes have more than doubled, and Islamophobic hate crimes have almost trebled. There's been a rise in hate crime in London by over 70%. And let's remember one thing. Most hate crimes are not even reported. So what we are talking here is a rise in reported crimes. So all the evidence points towards a situation where we are getting communities, particularly BME communities, people from minority backgrounds who are being scapegoated and being attacked. So yeah, I mean the language of the media and the politicians, as Rob very rightly pointed out, is extremely important. How we conduct ourselves, and this was an example of the leader of New Zealand. That she's shown real political leadership.
But what's your observation in terms of how the Prime Minister of New Zealand has conducted herself and helped actually a very bereaved Muslim community to come together? She has actually played a very strong role there, in terms of her actions from the very beginning. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think
the Parliament started today
Yeah.
with a recitation from Quran there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, Umesh. She has done a remarkable job. She has shown her humanity, steeliness, in determination in what she is saying, empathy with the people, and she has been saying they are us. So that's the humanity that we want to see from leaders of the world. And she has sharply contrasted herself with some of the world leaders that we don't want to name even, because they are these they are the sort of source of all this polarization in the world, and she has remarkably done well. The thing is, white supremacy, we have to understand that there is a hideous role in it. There's a root in it. In fact, white privilege, some people think that that privilege is gradually taken away by others. This is a misrepresentation or caricature of history. And in fact, the immigrant communities in most of the countries, they are sometimes second class or even impoverished. They don't have any position in the government. So by saying that they are taking over the country, it is a lie. So this is built on ignorance, arrogance, and hysteria. And if
which we have seen in Brexit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. The problem is the nativist white supremacy. That's the term some people are using. That probably could be the worst. And what happened in Second World War with the Jews and in Bosnia. So people fear that somewhere something could be replicated.
Can I just give you a very example, just for the last 24 hours? So we had three or four of the so-called Yellow Vest movement in this country. So they occupied, I think it was one of the Lord Chancellor's office, protesting about the very sad killing of the sad deaths of 3 young white teenagers who were run down by a driver who happened to be in the influence of alcohol. He was convicted and sent to prison for drink driving, and the attack was being he was being portrayed in the media by them as someone who was Muslim. Well, actually he wasn't. The fact is that the religion was irrelevant. He was of another faith. He was driving the influence of alcohol, mowed down 3 young people, and this whole attack was turned into this whole incident was turned into very into Islamophobic sort of incident. And then they said, we are now going to go down to Parliament to protest about Brexit. To protest, about politicians being soft on Brexit, and that is the thing that I think we've got to be alert about. There is this whole, because of the uncertainty on Brexit, there are far right-wing elements, and as Rob has pointed out, it's not just far right-wing elements. People, how they conduct themselves in politics and in the media, who are out to exploit uncertainties about Brexit. There's also this whole thing. The communities who voted to leave fear that they are being sold out by politicians. The great betrayal theory that we've seen in Germany after Germany lost in the First World War, and then Hitler and the whole ideology about Jews.
I just want to come.
But I just think it's frightening that an incident involving 3 innocent young children being killed by a drug of alcohol, and how those people, the so-called Yellow Vest movement, then immediately jump onto Brexit.
I know. Let me come to you, Rob. In terms of, you were saying that we have to build up this motion of protest, this movement. What's your vision? How do we do that? Because we have to stand up.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what we're facing and therefore how we respond. We are facing the biggest threat from the organised far right and indeed fascist movements since 1945. I put it as stark as that. It's international and it's growing. Now they're mobilising forces. It's not just a question of individuals like the terrorist in Christchurch. That violence expressed there is the violence that is inherent in these movements. These street and fascist movements, they want to use mass violence. They won't go into a mosque on their own, all right, and kill. They are waiting until they've got mass numbers and that they can use violence against those they see as their enemies. So what do we do? You see, I convened Stand Up to Racism in Newham. Unmesh is involved as well. And
so how can we make this as a social...
Right, yeah. What we're saying is you need a mass movement that is both stops these people being able to take the streets, but also creates a culture of opposition to racism and Islamophobia throughout society, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our colleges, that will challenge Islamophobia from a newspaper editor or a columnist and make it unacceptable, to drain the swamp of hate so that it undermines the ability of these right-wing forces to organise in the way that they're doing. And it's been done before. Well, it was done by the civil rights movement in the anti-apartheid movement, the anti-Nazi.
we saw
But just to give you some examples, so just last Friday, I was at the East London Mosque where we had the Bishop of London. She asked to come and join the congregation at the mosque with Sadiq Khan, and at Regent's Park Mosque just yesterday, we had the leaders of different faiths coming along with the Home Secretary to protest and to stand united against hate crime. But look, the question
is
of
that
building
going to be enough?
No. I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
Firstly, we did a massive mobilization in our communities. We need to raise the awareness of what exactly is going on today in the world, not just here, but the threat of the far right, of extremism, of forces of hate seeking to divide us, and hatred is aimed against various communities. So the trade union movement, for instance, I support the work that Stand Up to Racism is doing, as Bob has mentioned. In London, the trade union movement, remember, the trade union movement is 6 million strong. The Labour Party, my party, is 500,000 strong. We have launched a program through London United to raise consciousness.
We'll have to go for a break.
Break,
We'll have to
indeed.
go for a break. দর্শক, ছোট বিজ্ঞাপন বিরতির পর ফিরে আসছি, আমাদের সঙ্গে থাকুন।